Welcome to some more lessons for my free method book. You can download the free PDF off the website or just go to the YouTube link in the YouTube info section. So today we're looking at Etude number 10, the Swan, Etude number 11, the Old Douglas Fir, some dotted quarter notes, and then a Russian folk song, Little Birch Tree in the Field. So let me just play you the pieces and then we'll have a little lesson going over some technique and musical ideas about them. So, the Swan. And then the Old Douglas Fir. We'll have a lesson on the dotted quarter notes in just a second, but first the Little Birch Tree in the Field. Okay, so let's have a little lesson on these few pieces. So the Swan is the first piece in the book that is written with two voices. Now, what that means is that there's two independent musical lines happening at the same time, and you want to give attention to both of them. One might be more prominent than the other, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you're thinking of it as two different people playing almost. So the upper line is the melody. So if we played that on its own, we'd be just playing the melody on its own. 3, 4, 1, 2. And the bass voice on its own would be 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So you might think like, well, why do you need to write it in two separate voices? Well, because if you want to be very specific, if the composer wants to be very specific about how long notes should ring and what voice is what, then you have to write them separately. That's why there's a little rest above the bass note in the upper voice, is because each voice must be complete in its notation on its own. So when you're practicing the Swan, it's just a little melody with on the top voice, right, with I-am alternation, and just be a little bit careful of that special fingering needed to be legato from G to D. So we've been using our fourth finger on D and G, but in this case, because the note goes from G, then to D, it wouldn't sound smooth if it went like this. If you take your finger off, it's going to be a little bit of a hiccup. So I think the main thing to think about is that you need to connect the notes by leaving your fingers down until you hear the new sound. So that's why we have to use 4-3 on those particular notes. So those two notes have to connect to each other musically. Besides that, you've played lots of melodies up to this point, so I don't think you're going to find the piece very difficult. Just make sure you're phrasing really nicely and connecting the notes in a legato way. And then you have a little bass line as well, so that's another thing that's a little bit new. You're just going to play that all with your thumb. And besides that, I think you won't have any difficulty with it. Just make sure that you are very comfortable reading it and playing it nice and smoothly. Okay, Etude number 11, the Old Douglas Fir. This is another two-voice piece. It's just a little bit different of a texture. But in this piece, you have notes that are played at the same time. This is when having two voices makes a lot of sense as well. So at the end of the second line, you have an E and a B, and they're played together. And that's the first time in this book where you have two voices played at the same time, outside of chords. So you would just play those together, one with the thumb, one with the index finger. And then in the final measure of the piece, you have two A's. So you just play them at the same time. Just be a little bit careful of the right hand fingering in this piece. Make sure you're alternating the fingers, even though there's half notes which take up a little bit of time, or dotted quarters. Just make sure you're alternating those fingers in general. I mean, if you repeat a finger after a line or after a dotted half note, that's not the end of the world, but make sure that within the melody that you're definitely alternating your right hand fingers. Besides that, just try to make sure that the upper voice sounds like a melody, right? So like taper it a little bit at the end and at the beginning. And you just don't want to throw the bass notes in and be just like disruptive with it. You don't want it to sound like this. It's just too disconnected. You want the upper voice to sound like a nice melody. Sorry. Like really letting those notes ring on the top voice. And then the lower notes, they do occur on those beats, but they're just not as disruptive. Okay, so dotted quarter notes are a little bit of a new rhythm in the piece. So maybe the first way you should learn the dotted quarter note is just by thinking of a song that sounds like that. So like Deck the Halls, the Christmas Carol. That first rhythm is a dotted quarter note followed by an eighth note. So if we count this with ands, it would sound like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... So you can practice counting out loud and playing at the same time. But go to the next exercises, and I think this is really, really important, and we've done this before with eighth notes, is that you're going to count the first set of rhythms. The next two examples are exactly the same notes, exactly the same rhythms, but the counting is different. One subdivides the beat, saying the ands, and one does not. And I think it's really important that you are able to do both. So the first one, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... Now exactly the same music, but without the ands. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you can't say the counting out loud and play it at the same time, then make sure you work on this until you can. So if you can't do the whole example, just do one bar at a time then. Just take a small amount and make sure that you are confident with it and that you can do it. If you can't count it and play it at the same time, then you're lacking an essential skill. Maybe you have to go back in the book and review some of the previous pages and do the counting to make sure you can do those first. But just make sure you work on this until you can do both examples with the instructions that I said there. Because you want to make sure that you don't progress past this point until you actually know this material and you can actually have the skills of counting out loud and playing. Now, the little birch tree in the field, this is a Russian folk song, and if you've been watching all the videos, the duet videos, you noticed that I was playing with Natasha, and Natasha is originally from Russia, and so she suggested this very popular folk tune that I think everyone knows in Russia. And it's just a nice little melody, and with a couple of little bass notes, it just fits right in the book very nicely at this point. There's not much to say about this one. It is two voices again, so make sure you're practicing the melody on its own. So that's just the notes with stems going up. And then you're just going to throw the bass voice in and just not let the melody get too disrupted by it. There's not too much to say, but you want to be comfortable with the previous two voice songs where we had notes together, because that's really important for your development. And you just have to be able to do that and be really comfortable with the dotted notes, because in this song it does have dotted quarter notes. So on the third line, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. You just want to you want to be able to count this piece and play it at the same time, making sure that you have all those skills that are necessary. I mean, you can probably just learn it by ear by listening to it and just replaying it, but just make sure that once you can play it and you're really happy with the song, that you can also count it as well. So in the next set of videos, we'll be covering the Lienda theme by Albanese, which is a very popular one for students, and then some chromatic scale, and we're looking at some accidentals, so some sharps and flats, and we'll also do green sleeves, and then we'll be nearing the end of the first part of the method book.